All right, everybody, welcome back to episode 5 of No Dog in the Fight, the Jeb Board Media Spectrum Fantasy Football
Spectrum.
podcast. The
Yeah.
Spectrum, I believe that's a good way to explain it. This is Grayson Applin. Alongside me, as always, is Nick Noah. And then we also have the mascot of the No Dog in the Fight podcast, Ranger. Since he likes to get on camera about every time we do this.
Yep.
So,
Ranger's a
um,
good boy.
yeah, he's a goofball, is what he is. He can't stand it when we get on here and we do these calls, and it's we get on here for Jeb Board or we get on here for No Dog, and you can usually sit him sitting about right here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's usually just like the top half of his head. He looks like an alligator in the water, just kind of looking back and forth, and
Yep.
it's funny. He'll sit here, and usually whatever I have on the screen, whether it be football or whatever it is, he's usually sitting there watching it. So he might as well be a play-by-play analyst.
Yep. And if you ever see a white blur behind me, that would be the other dog in No Dog in a Fight, Atlas. He's never sitting. So yeah, you'll probably never see him because of how much he just can't sit still.
Yeah, well, Rangers, he's lazy, man. He when he sits down and I'm back from work, whether it be 3 hours or 13 hours, he'll get up and he'll run around a little bit, and then he's usually like he is right now and just kind of laying right on me. I just called.
Yeah. Yeah. He just Kyle. Oh, that was beautiful.
I did not think that through. All right.
Keep
Well,
it.
yeah, leave it in. Well, all right, Nick. Well, let's get into our fantasy football for the week. As always, you have the floor with the studs for the week.
Yeah, and so before I get into him, I was kind of telling Grayson beforehand that when I do the studs, I don't always just pick the highest scoring out of each position. It's more of a thing where um it does go into it obviously, but I really try and look and see like who's kind of surprising, who scored more than they usually should. So if they're in like the top 3, top 5, and it's like a name that it's like, okay, that was a big boom because they were not expected to do that. That's going to be my stud. So to start us off is Josh Allen, and he's expected, but I mean, again, this year quarterback play has been down, but for quarterback to score 40, I mean, he had 39.66 points. If it wasn't for the pick, he would have had 41. But Josh Allen, he had a huge game against the Eagles, who has a really solid defense. But I mean, he had a great game passing, 339 yards and 2 touchdowns with the 1 pick. But he had the 81 yards rushing with 2 rushing touchdowns as well. That really kind of set him
Well,
apart.
and Nick, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but other than maybe like Lamar Jackson one week, there really hasn't been like quarterbacks that are sniffing that 40 range this year, is it?
CJ Stroud,
Oh,
he
yeah,
hit
CJ
it. He
Stroud.
hit it
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I mean, I feel like last year you were seeing, Justin Fields like go for 40 every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And you
You had
just
guys like
had like,
Mahomes.
yeah, Mahomes. You had so many players that were just out of nowhere dropping 40. And this year I think we've had 3 in total.
I think you're right.
Uh, and technically I don't even think Stroud ever reached 40. He was in that 39 area. And I mean, Josh Allen, he's in that 39 area. So I mean, it's really like just quarterback. When we talked about it before, just quarterback play is so down as far as fantasy goes. So next for running back, we've got the return of Kyron Williams. Not only is he the unexpected, but he was the top scoring running back. And Kyron Williams, he had a really big game. He didn't get a rushing touchdown, but he had 143 yards rushing off only 16 carries, but he also caught all
Dang.
6 targets for 61 yards and 2 touchdowns receiving.
Mhm.
So he had 38.4. So that was a huge, if you had him off IR and you kept him on your bench, I know you're reeling right now because that sucks. My wide receiver, he was the wide receiver 3 this week, is Rashee Rice. for Kansas City. And every week we kind of, I don't know if we ever actually say it, but we keep kind of inching towards the, okay, maybe he's wide receiver one at Kansas City as a rookie. Because we see Kansas City's receiving corps. They lead the league in drops, and it's bad. But Rashee Rice has been a glimmer in the dark for that wide receiver room. He had 8 catches, 107 yards, and a touchdown for 24.7 yard or points.
Well, and going off what you're talking about too, and this is just kind of a spite thing to say for me, but when when Marquise Valdez-Scantling is an option, that's that's not good. Obviously, he dropped that pass. What was it, this past week, and bashed his helmet against it, and people were saying, "Wow, we're surprised he held on to that too." When he bashed his helmet against the wall. I mean, it's just like they're outside of Kelsey, which you could consider not in the receiving core. Rashee Rice has been that bright spot, but they went into this year thinking Kadarius Toney was going to be the guy, and yeah, I definitely did, and that did not pan out at all. So luckily they have found something in Rashee Rice. I know Sky Moore hasn't panned out as well as they had thought to. So,
And
I think a very good pick for a sleeper draft, like we talked about that episode 1, is whatever receiver Kansas City takes round 1 or round 2, because one's got to be coming.
yep. And you mentioned Valdez-Scantling. I feel like Valdez-Scantling is very overrated in a sense of he caught that one of the Hail Marys, I believe, from Aaron Rodgers at Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers kind of made him in a sense. And when he went, and he had an okay season last year, honestly, at Kansas City, but I just feel like he's a very overrated player based on big hype plays, and in my opinion, just like George Pickens. But we'll get into we'll just talk about that later.
Yeah. Well, and going into this, just because I hate Marquez Valdez-Scantling so much, he had 1 week where he had 17.4 points. The highest total he has had after that was 6.8 against Detroit week 1. He has not scored over 5 points in 9 of the 11 games that he has played. He had 3 targets, 0 catches against Philadelphia. And then this past week, he had 1 target, 1 reception for -1 yards.
Safe to say he's not going to be in our waiver pickup segment this week.
Yeah, sell him for a bag of chips and some pocket lint.
Yeah, no, I'd just sell him for a roster spot at this point. If
Yeah.
you somehow have him, you're either a huge Chiefs fan or you're Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
You auto drafted and never looked at your league again.
Yeah. So, but at tight end, I did split them. I did not want to give one over the other because I feel like they're of equal value. Is first I talked about Pat Freiermuth returning from IR. Matt Canada's gone, and very low expectations for the Steelers offense just because of how bad they've been. And they lose their offensive coordinator. He comes back first week and catches 9 catches for 120 yards. Doesn't score a touchdown, but scores 21, and technically he is the number 1 tight end this week.
Mm-hmm.
So that was extremely impressive for him to come back and not skip a beat like that. And plus, I mean, very few other Steelers receivers have had over 100 yards this year. So for him to come back that quick. And another guy that I want to talk about is Tyler Higbee. Again, this is not me saying, oh, everybody needs to go pick up Tyler Higbee right now. But he's not scored a single touchdown all year, but he has started every single game.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he's been their starting tight end. It's not like one of these guys that, gets activated from the practice squad and all of a sudden, oh, here's, whoever. Tyler Higbee's been playing all year. He just hasn't scored a touchdown, but he scores 2 in this game and has 19.9. So he was a big impact player, but I doubt many people started him unless they're in a very deep league. where you have potentially two tight ends starting. Uh, but yeah, I mean, he was definitely a bright spot in the tight end group this week.
Yeah. Well, I guess that'll get us into our duds this week, starting off with quarterback. Man, Tua hurt a lot of people this week, including me. Against the Jets, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Jets defense is not a bunch of slouches. They are a decent defense, but you would think Tua would at least put up his projected. He had 7.82 points in a PPR league, 243 yards passing, one touchdown. He had two interceptions. Along with that, had a fumble as well. So he hurt a lot of people this week in terms of his overall play. And what killed him? Let's see, two interceptions and a fumble. That's -6 points right there. So he realistically, he still only had about 13. So I don't know. It's the Jets defense is good. Don't get me wrong, but in the same token, I mean, he still got to hit his projected on that with how highlight that the Miami defense is, or offense is. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Moving on to running back. It feels like I'm just picking off my team at this point in time. It's Saquon Barkley. Against New England, the worst team by far in the AFC East, potentially one of the worst teams in the league that's going to have a top potentially 3 draft pick. I only had 12 carries, 46 yards. One reception for 6 yards. No touchdowns. 6.2 points total. I don't get him, man. I don't get him. He came back so strong off injury and was averaging about 15 a game. 15, 16 a game, which is fine. That's great. 7.1 against Dallas. Okay, it was Dallas. 30 against Washington. Okay, now we're back on track. Went to they weren't even in New England. They were playing in New York, which, I mean, okay, what to do? Boston, New York, okay, yeah. Same general area. Weather shouldn't be a factor. He goes out 46 points or 46 yards. I wish he had 46 points. So, yeah, it was just a brutal week to have him on your team. Another person to have on your team, a brutal week. I picked Cooper Kupp as my dud just because of his name. Honorable mention on this is Adam Thielen, who only had one reception for 9 yards. But Cooper Kupp this week, who, by the way, has not performed at the level that he was projected to, especially in fantasy. Basically, after the second week, he was back week 6.
Yep.
He has not scored more than 7 points since week 7, and this past week he had 4.8. And if I'm not mistaken, no, okay, I thought he was our dud last week, but Garrett Wilson only had 0.9 points. But yeah, 4.8 for Cooper Kupp, 3 receptions for 18 yards. I don't feel like it's. I just don't know if he's not getting open or if Stafford's still not really targeting him or what. Obviously, a lot of it went to Higbee this week, and I know you got Puka Nacua that's out there, and then Kyron Williams is coming out of the backfield, but Cooper Kupp's been a staple in that offense all since basically he's been there, even on the Super Bowl team. And now it's to a point where he's almost a non-factor. Even in a game against Dallas where he had 10 targets, he only had 4 receptions for 21 yards. So finally, it gets to our tight end. Ooh, looky here, we're back on my team again. George Kittle. That man coaxed me into playing him so hard. I've sat him for the past almost 4 weeks. Yeah, I sat him the past 3 weeks for sure. 23 points, 20 points, 22 points. And against Seattle, 5 targets, 3 receptions, 19 yards, 4.9 points. I don't understand the disconnect there. I don't get it.
You were talking about boomer bust players. He is the definition of a boomer bust player.
Absolutely.
I mean, he either scores you 20 to 25 or it's less than less than 7.
He has boomed 6 times this year, which is hard to believe. Well, actually, it's not because he boomed probably week 8, week 10, week 11, week 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe week 3. But then he's also busted twice, which I don't see how he's just busting twice.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the times that he busted was the 1.9 points and the 1.1 points in week 4 and week 6. But I consider 4.9 points against Pittsburgh a bust, 4.9 points against Seattle a bust. Even 6 points against the Rams, I would still consider that a bust.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Anything below 9, in my opinion, is a bust for George Kittle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Considering that he is what he can be considered a top 3, top 4 tight end in the league right now between Kelsey, Hawkinson, Andrews, Kittle. There's 4 guys right there. You got guys waiting in the wings like Sam Laporta. Evan Ingram's not the best guy, but he's pretty consistent. He'll get you anywhere from 9 to 12 points a game, but maybe pop off. But I don't get where the disconnect is, man. I don't know if it's just because once those, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, where Brock Purdy has these weapons and those weapons come back, Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey both kind of injured. When those weapons come back, Kittle becomes a non-factor or what? But I mean, it's phenomenal how volatile his point scoring is in fantasy.
Yep.
Well, moving on into waiver pickups, we really only had one, and it was the guy you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
We got him for both of them. I mean, nobody really impressed us this week. There really hasn't been a lot of guys that are still on the waiver wire. But I mean, you brought him up in the studs. You take it away.
Yeah, it's Pat Freiermuth again. And with waiver pickups, it's not really a gamble because we're not saying he's a lock to start. But Pat Freiermuth without Matt Canada now could open up. And some of the best advice that I've ever gotten from fantasy, like when I several years ago, is if you play it safe, then you'll be consistently like a top 5 player in your league, but you probably won't win. You have to take risks. And I'm thinking one of those risks is try if you don't have one of those top 5 tight ends, is get Freiermuth right now.
Yep.
Get him. If you're high on waivers, get him, because he can be the difference. Because again, he's barely played this year, so it's a risk starting him, but he has the chance to take your team to the next level. You have to take that gamble. Whereas, you've got other guys that, you could start a Kittle, for example, because he's a big name, but he's just it's a 50-50 shot if he's going to score 20, or is he going to score 4? But Pat Freiermuth, say you do have like a guy like Higbee. Higbee is not scoring 2 touchdowns a game. Like he got this one. So Pat Freiermuth is a gamble, but you should definitely pick him up. And again, I mean, take a gamble.
So the thing with Freiermuth too is that it goes back to the whole Matt Canada getting fired thing. It has to be a difference in the offensive play. Pat Freiermuth had almost as many targets this past week against Cincinnati as he did his first 4 games combined before he got hurt.
Yep.
In his first 4 games, he had 13 targets. In this game, he had 11. And he tripled his yardage. And I mean, he had more receptions this game than he's had all season combined. So I definitely think that I don't know what Matt Canada was telling Kenny Pickett. Like, don't check down, I guess. I don't know. Don't throw it to your tight end. Let him block. I don't really know. But Pat Fryermuth definitely seems like he's going to be more of an option now, especially for Kenny Pickett, who has been struggling under the Matt Canada offense. So still don't think he's a great quarterback, but I think that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for especially the check down guys, specifically Fryermuth, Jalen Warren, and Najee Harris. Do I think Deontay Johnson or George Pickens their production is going to pop up any? Maybe a little bit, maybe like 2.5 points. But I think the real growth is going to be between your tight ends and your running backs.
And it's funny because you're going to have more production that way to those three people, simply for the fact that, these receivers, like, yeah, you got your George Pickens and your Deontay Johnsons, but they're not making much happen right now. But if you need, like, Kenny Pickett, instead of throwing it out of bounds, you do that 3-4 yard check down, like you were talking about, Grayson, that's going to get you that extra 7 to 10 yards, because this was the first time of the season, correct me if I'm wrong, that they've hit 400 yards on offense.
Yes.
And
that
should be a staple.
Fun fact about them this past week, up until the game yesterday, which I don't even know if they outgained, but every game they won this year, they have been outgained in every single game.
Yeah, this was the first that they outgained Cincinnati or any team. And this is the first game that they've been without their offensive coordinator. So, Kenny Pickett was lucky to get 150 yards passing, and first game without Matt Canada, he gets 120 simply just to one player. So there's a direct correlation. So again, take your chances on Fryermuth.
Yeah. Well, that gets us in the sell high buy low, and I'll go ahead and start with my sell high here, Nick.
Go ahead and do your both, because my sell high and buy low kind of play into each other.
Yeah. Absolutely. So my sell high, again, this is the end of the season. Trade deadline's getting close. You got to make big moves. I feel like a big move to make would be to sell high on Austin Ekeler. I do not think his production. Now, granted, they've played two decent defenses this past week, or the past 2 weeks. They played Green Bay, who's got a decent defense. Baltimore's got a decent defense, but he went 3 weeks against Chicago, New York, and Detroit, where he scored over 20 points each game. And then he had 7.0 and 9.4. It's not really looking good for him in terms of defenses that he's playing for the rest of the season. Whether it be Saquon Barkley didn't have a great week against New England. They're playing New England this week, this coming up week. Denver's defense, we talked about Denver's defense. They're playing up to par. Now, Las Vegas, he might have a good game there, but then he's got Buffalo and Kansas City. So I feel like if you would trade him and sell him as a running back number one and focus on his boom weeks, you could potentially get you I would say you could get a top 10 wide receiver one out of that, or maybe a tight end. And then going into my buy low, God, it was really a toss-up between any Washington receiver, but I picked the most consistent one, and it was Jahan Dotson. He had a slow start to the year, like we talked about before the podcast, Nick. But and I think he got hurt week 10. I think he left the game week 10. But he's had over the past 5 weeks 24.8, 16.9, 0 when he came out, 11.3 and 10.2. You could buy him as depending on what you need, a receiver 2 or flex, and you're not having to give up much for him, I don't think. Because on paper, if you look at it, Scary Terry is the number one receiver there. And I don't even look what Scary Terry's numbers were over the past couple weeks. 7.3, 9.3, and 9.0.
Yeah.
Sam Howell is actually spreading the ball out a decent bit amongst his receivers. Curtis Samuel had 19 points this past week, 9 receptions for 100 yards. So, but the consistency is with Jahan Dotson. I think if you pick up Jahan Dotson, that, like I said, that could be maybe a wide receiver too, more of a flex position, but that could be a guy that if you have someone like, I don't know, like a Marquise Brown or
Yeah.
or an Adam Thielen, if you've got somebody, or even a Cooper Cup, you got somebody that's not
No,
playing up.
I'd go Mark Cooper too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you have somebody that's not performing and only getting you 4 points and you're losing these games by 10 points, Jahan Dotson can make a difference on your team.
Yes. So I'm playing off last week. Uh Derrick Henry is my sell high.
Okay.
Derrick Henry had a really good game against the Panthers, and I said that would be his. I said it was a hot take, and it still may be a hot take, but I said that's his going away farewell game.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the transition. This is going to be the last team that they play with actually, like, that he can actually get some yards, because next games he's got the Colts, the Dolphins, the Texans, the Seahawks, the Texans, Jaguars. And I don't think the Titans are going to get any better. And
Nope.
so we've seen all season him start to lose reps, him not being on the field for third downs. And when they get down, he doesn't get the touches. And I mean, even in this game against the Panthers, he got the touches. He didn't have the yards, but he still had the touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
He scored 20 points, but had 2 touchdowns. So 8 points without the touchdowns. And this year, I'm not relying on Derrick Henry to score the touchdowns every game.
Yeah.
And so this stretch is going to be rough for him. So sell him high. And when you're looking for another running back to replace him and you want to sell low or buy low, excuse me, is his counterpart, Tajay Spears.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the exact opposite reason of selling Derrick Henry on these third downs, when they're down, when they need a change of pace, when Will Levis is looking for an RPO, Tajay Spears is going to get about 10 touches for the rush and anywhere from 5 to 7 receptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now with this transition, again, with this tough schedule ahead, Tajay's going to get a lot of looks because I think they're going to be down a lot. And when you have a team that's like the Titans that do struggle to put up consistently a lot of points with some of these higher scoring offenses, this is where you need to look. Get Tajay Spears for cheap before
Yeah.
he basically pulls a Jalen Warren.
Yeah.
And because Jalen Warren right now, earlier in the year, he was one of our waiver pickups. I think he was yours, Grayson. And now, like, especially if you have a dynasty league, but, just thinking ESPN, your 1 year leagues, Jalen Warren, you're going to have to sell pretty high to get him or buy pretty high to get him. So, yeah, Tajay Spears, do it before he becomes the next Jalen Warren.
Agreed. Well, that gets us to our final segment. Best possible. So, Nick, let's start off with the QBs. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm going. You mentioned him earlier, Sam Howell against Miami. I think the only way that the Commanders can stay in the game is to keep up with Miami's offense, and the way that they do that is the passing. And Sam Howell has begun to spread the ball out, and whether that be passes to one of the receiver core or Logan Thomas, who's come on pretty decently as a top 10 tight end, or Brian Robinson / Antonio Gibson. I mean, he leads the league in passing yards. And so if he can throw a couple touchdowns in there as well, Sam Howell can be looking pretty solid.
Absolutely. And the big thing with Sam Howell too, and this is just the product of where he's at right now. He's thrown a decent bit of interceptions and taken a lot of sacks. His offensive line is not helping him out at all. So if he can find a way to limit that, I mean, he can go from scoring, 19, 20, 21 points a game up to that 27-28 mark very easily.
Yep.
I picked Trevor Lawrence. Number one, Calvin Ridley looks like he's showing up again. Like,
Careful.
yeah, I know. I'm saying that now. I'm gonna have to figure out if I need to start him. But I guess he went and gambled a little bit and got his groove back, and now Trevor Lawrence or he's back on the team. They've had Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne. They've got a solid running game for the most part to kind of balance that out. In the past 5 weeks, basically since the bye week, Cincinnati's defense, like just fantasy wise, has not had over 5 points. They've got turnovers here and there, interceptions, fumble recoveries, yada yada yada, a couple sacks here and there. But the big thing was like against Baltimore, they allowed 34 points. They had 3 sacks, but no interceptions there are no interceptions. Pittsburgh, no interceptions. They had 1 fumble recovery, which doesn't reflect on the QB because I don't think it was the QB. But they had 2 points against a Pittsburgh team that only scored 16 total points in the game. So I think Trevor Lawrence has a pretty stellar game against them. I mean, against Houston, he had 24.56 points. And then the week before that, he had 32 against Tennessee. So I think that streak's going to continue. My running back for this week, and I feel like this has been a long time coming for this guy, Jonathan Taylor. I think you start him against Tennessee. Man, it took him a minute to come back, but he's kind of been on a tear a little bit, not going to lie. Over the past 5 games he's played, the lowest he's had is 10.7 in a week where he still had 95 yards rushing. I think he's going to run all over Tennessee. I think he's going to have a touchdown, maybe 2, and he's going to start work. And the carries have just went up. He started out with 18, went to 12, 18, 23, 15 attempts against Tampa Bay, but he also had 2 touchdowns. So I think he's finally saying, hey, I'm still the guy from 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So give
Good
me
pick.
JT against Tennessee.
Good pick. I'm going, surprising because again, he's just, I don't know, like, I feel like we do this every year. He's just a very forgettable player, even though he's like top 5 in the running back position is Raheem Mostert. Every year we do this when he was with San Francisco, and now every year we're like, oh, Raheem Mostert should not be the guy. But here he is. And before you look, he's scored 25 points, 30 points. I mean, he's been huge. And I think against the Commanders, he's probably going to have a big game. And my thinking on that is that I think the Commanders are going to focus a lot on the Tyreek Hill, the Jalen Waddle, and ever since losing all of their defensive line, besides Jonathan Allen,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have a great linebacking core. And so Raheem Mostert catching, a little swing pass or, even just like an inside zone has potential to break away big and quick because he is fast. So I think Raheem Mostert could have a really big game against the Commanders. Following up on that is my wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And the Detroit Lions, they lost on Thanksgiving. I chalk that up to voodoo, whatever you want to call it. They haven't won Thanksgiving in 6 straight years, whatever. I don't think that puts any hindrance on the team itself because they have done, outstanding. They have the best record that the Lions have had since I think the 60s. So,
Yeah.
I think they get back on track this week. They're playing the Saints. The Saints just don't look good, in my opinion. And as if you watch the Jib board, as is my whole opinion on the NFC South, But Amon-Ra St. Brown should again just be right up there in the top four with fantasy scoring this year, if not number one this week. So I think he's going to have a field day against the Saints.
Yeah. Well, for my receiver, I'm going to take the LA Chargers receiving core, whose name is Keenan Allen. Give me Keenan Allen, the number 2 receiver, against a struggling New England team. This man has scored over 20 points the last 3 weeks, and he's had basically 15 over the past 5. I mean, I think he got hurt a little bit maybe against Kansas City, but this dude is putting up insane numbers. We're not even talking about week 3 where he had 45.46 points, but 22 points. Dude, over the past 3 weeks, 14 targets, 16 targets, 16 targets. He's had double-digit receptions in the past 3 weeks, and then he had, again, 18 against Minnesota. Against the struggling New England defense, give me Keenan Allen.
Keenan Allen's floor is most people's ceiling.
Without a reasonable doubt.
It's insane.
It is. For tight end, I'm going to go kind of the same route you did with receiver. Give me Sam Laporta against a struggling New Orleans team. Getting to see them play firsthand, as long as Goff can keep the ball away from Tyrann Mathieu, I think he's fine. Laporta hasn't necessarily been all that consistent over the past 4 or 5 weeks, but he had 8 targets, 5 receptions, 47 yards, and a touchdown against Green Bay. I see no reason why he doesn't duplicate those numbers this week against New Orleans. I feel like tight ends do play well against New Orleans, and this is going to be a week where he's going to be in that between that 15 to 20 point category.
There's no reason he shouldn't. So I branched out on mine. I wanted to be, I'm sure Travis Kelce's going to have a big game, but in the mood that I've already talked about taking risks is Cade Otton. Cade Otton's been, tight end 1 for the Bucks, but going up against the Panthers. And the Panthers are going to, again, game plan specific for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And I think that's going to leave the check down, kind of like what we were talking about with Freiermuth, is I think you're going to see a big benefit from Cade Otton and Rachaad White getting a lot of these checkdowns, especially because I hear Baker Mayfield's banged up a little bit. Probably still going to play. Baker's a dog. He's always been that player. He's gritty. He's going to play through injury. And so I think Cade Otton is primed up to have, I won't say the yards. He won't have the yards per se, but he'll have 5 to 6 receptions for probably a touchdown and maybe 30, 40 yards. But I think he's going to have a lot of these 3 to 7 yard checkdowns given to him.
Yeah. All right. Well, what you got for your flex?
So this one I'm kind of excited about because I really like what I saw is Devontae Smith. We've talked so much about AJ Brown, and AJ Brown is, a no-brainer. AJ Brown is demanding all of the attention, basically, from defenses. And going up against a good defense like San Francisco, Charvarius Ward is probably going to be on him all game, which leaves Devontae Smith, who has been very consistent. He's going to get those second progressions kind of looks. And so he can get a lot of yards after the catch. Again, we saw it against Buffalo. I think we see it again this week when San Francisco is game planning for not Antonio Brown. Jesus Christ.
Ugh.
Wow, I've got his CTE. No, AJ Brown though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for my flex, I'm going to pick a guy that is not necessarily he's had his ebbs and flows this year for sure. And I feel like he's back on an ebb this week, and or I guess a flow this week. Um, give me Isaiah Pacheco against Green Bay. Um, Green Bay is starting to look decent. I don't know how decent, but something has seems like it's changed a little bit with them. But one thing that I do think will be a constant is that we'll have a hard time stopping the run wherever they go. And if Pacheco can get the run game going and be able to have the 15 touches that he usually gets, usually maybe get about 65 yards and a touchdown, and then gets us the big thing for him is going to be getting the ball out of the backfield, which I know is hard with Kelsey, but if he can get the ball out of the backfield, or not even out of the backfield, just maybe like a toss or a pitch out to the flat, I think he can do damage. I mean, we have seen
Yep.
he's a hard guy to bring down. He doesn't run soft. He is very violent. So I think if they are able to get him the ball outside of the tackles and let him get into the flats against these DBs and these safeties that aren't really used to the contact that linebackers and defensive linemen are, I think Pacheco could have 15 points easily.
Absolutely. I mean, you've seen just like every single year, and I brought it up earlier on the Jeb board, is just it's becoming a two-man, kind of thing with Kansas City and their running backs. You got McKinnon, who really has not had the year that he had last year.
Mm-mm.
And Pacheco, who's becoming almost the every down back, where he's taking all the runs and now he's taking all the screens. Because Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we see it every year, and my God, he plays like the first three games. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is shit.
Well, all right. Well, that ends at part 1 and part 2 of a No Dog in the Fight episode 5. Go check us out on everything. You know what? Go listen to like the last 30 seconds of the Jebboard podcast. Go see where you can find us. Okay, it's everywhere else that Jebboard's at. Okay.
Just look us up on Instagram, Jebboard, whatever we are.
Jeb
go to our
board
link tree.
podcast.
Yeah, just go to our link tree. That's all you got to do. All of it's there.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, all you casuals at home, thank you for listening again. And until next time, don't get faded.